We are talking about questions Jesus asked. When we look at the gospel accounts, Jesus asks a number of questions, depending on how you count them, somewhere around 170 plus questions. Jesus is asked somewhere around 100 questions, about 120, depending on, again, how you count them. And out of those 100 plus questions, he only answers 8. In that culture, that's the way you learned. In American culture, we focus on information. In their culture, in the Jewish culture, in the world at that time, they focused, rather than just about information, they focused on engagement. They wanted you to wrestle with the question. They wanted you to think about it. And so we've been walking through some of those. We talked about the first question was the question of faith. When Jesus looked at his disciples and said, "Who do you say that I am?" And we wrestled with the idea that you and I need to stop and ask ourselves, who is Jesus Christ in our life? Then last week, we talked about the question of, Jesus said, what's going to profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? It's a question really of purpose. What are you pursuing in life, and what are you going to do with it? So it kind of starts to lay out these issues that we need to wrestle with as Christians in 2026. This morning, we're going to look at a question that honestly seems like a pretty silly question. But when you dig into it, you find out there's a lot of reflection behind this question. And it's really a question of desire. What do you want? So we're going to pick up the story. It's found in John chapter 5, and here's what it says. It says that after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, there is at Jerusalem, by the sheep market, a pool, which in the Hebrew tongue is called Bethsaida, having 5 porches. Now, in these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water, and whosoever was first after the troubling of the water stepped in and was made whole of whatsoever disease they had. Now, if you'll notice, I put in there that this is from the King James Version. The reason I did is if you have a newer version, an NIV or something like that, verse 4, that verse in there about an angel going in and troubling the water, it won't be in those versions. There'll be usually a footnote in the Bible, and it'll say some of the earlier manuscripts do not include this verse. Okay? It doesn't change the story at all. It just gives us maybe an insight to why everybody's sitting around this pool. But I want to be honest with the text, so I want you to be aware of the issue. Let's make sure we understand it. Jesus is down at Jerusalem for a feast. He is there, and while he's there, he makes his way to Bethsaida. So let me give you an idea that you understand where all of this is taking place. This is the Temple Mount. If you see a picture of Jerusalem, there's a big gold dome. That's at the Temple Mount. There's an eastern wall, and then there is the fortress of Antonia. That's where the Roman soldiers all hung out. And then the supposed place of the crucifixion. And you'll see just outside the Temple Mount, there's Bethsaida. Here's another view of kind of where it is. You see how it kind of has those columns all the way around it, those porches? There's actually 2 pools there, 2 main pools, the North Pool and the South Pool. To give you an idea of the size, they're about 200 feet wide. So this building's 100 foot, that building's 100 foot. So the width would be these 2 buildings. About 300 feet long. So if you actually take another one of these buildings and add it on to it, and no, we're not going to do that this week. You add it on to it, that'd be about 300 feet long. Okay. If you want an idea kind of what it may have looked like, here's an idea kind of how it looked like. So this is where all of this is taking place, okay? This is kind of what's happening is it's feast time. Jesus is in the whole Temple Mount area. He makes his way over here. He is now in this area. The belief there has something to do with the idea that an angel is going to come down from heaven and touch this water, and this water is going to be now special water, and whoever gets in first gets healed. That's the idea, okay? So notice what happens here. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. Now that's important because you need to understand this. The lifespan for a male, Jewish male at this time, first of all, about 30 to 40% of people born didn't make it to 5. There was an incredibly high infant mortality rate. If a man made it to 20, he would be considered having lived a full life if he made it to 60. So 50 to 60 was considered old, and you were on borrowed time. There weren't a lot of people that made it to 70. So I want you to think about this because this is going to play into the story a little bit. He's had this whatever for 38 years. If you're only going to make it to 50 or 60, it's kind of what you're used to doing. Notice when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Now to us, that seems like a dumb question. I mean, he's sick. He's had this condition for 38 years. He's sitting there waiting to get into the water when the angel comes down, and he thinks that's gonna get him well, and that's where his focus is. And all of a sudden, we don't know how long he's been sitting there. We don't know how long he's got this hope that that's going to happen. But here's this guy. The reason that he's there is to get well. And Jesus comes along and says, "You want to get well?" There's a ton of things to learn from that question. But here's what's interesting. The guy doesn't answer the question. Notice what he says. "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, somebody else goes down ahead of me." In other words, he doesn't deal with the question of, "Oh, yes, sir, I want to be healed." Instead, he focuses on the process. "Well, you know what? Do you want to get healed?" "Well, if I could get somebody to get me in the water faster, then yes." And now notice what Jesus does and what Jesus says. "Get up. Pick up your mat." That's a problem. That's a big problem. "And walk." I think it's interesting. Jesus doesn't tell him where to go. Jesus just looks at him and says, "Get up, pick up your bed, and walk." When Jesus looks at him and says, "Pick up your bed," that's significant. And here's why. It's the Sabbath. To carry something on the Sabbath is to violate the interpretation of the Jews for the Old Testament command. In the Old Testament, there are 613 commands. What the Jews had done at this point, the Jewish rabbis and everybody else, they had drilled these things down. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, right? It's a day of rest. It's a day of reflection. Here's a question. What's work? So the rabbis, the ancient teachers, went through and defined what is work and what is not. In other words, what is approved by God and what is sin. Here's one of the interpretations. You get up in the morning and you have a toothache. Horrible pain. Again, they don't have dentists. They don't have the... So the typical deal in that culture was to put vinegar on the tooth. The law said if you put vinegar, the interpretation of the law from the Jewish people was, if you got up that morning and had a toothache and you put vinegar on your tooth, that was work. That was a sin. You can't do that. That was work. However, they interpreted it to also mean that if you sat down for lunch and you wanted to put vinegar on your salad, that was okay. That's how crazy this had gotten. The idea of being able to walk, you could only walk so far on the Sabbath. In fact, the way some of them got around it is what they would do is, the interpretation was you could only walk so far from your house. Okay, so here's how crazy this got with some people. They get a little bag of dirt. So before they left their house, they get a little bag of dirt and they put it in their pouch. And let's say it was 500 steps from your house. They count them all, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. Take a little dirt out, they throw it out and go, okay, now I'm back home. 1, 2, 3. That's how crazy this got. So when Jesus looks at this man and says, get up, no problem. Pick up your mat and walk. Whoa. That's a problem. The story goes on. At once, the man was cured. We'll talk about this in a second, but here's what's amazing to me. There is no faith on this man's part, just obedience. In fact, you're going to find he doesn't even know who this guy is. Notice what happened. He picked up his mat and walked. Now, the day on which this took place was the Sabbath. So the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. We understand you haven't walked for 38 years, but listen, the big deal here is you're carrying the mat. That's how crazy this was. It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. They're just doing what the guy said. So they asked him, who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? The man who was healed had no idea who it was, because Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. In other words, here's the answer. I don't know. Some guy told me to stand up, walk, carry my mat. That's what I'm doing. He didn't know it was Jesus. He didn't know anything at all. And notice what happens next. Later, Jesus found him at the temple. Now here's the thing. Jesus never told him where to go. But he makes his way to the temple. And Jesus finds him there. And Jesus said to him, see, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. Now we don't understand all the implications of this. What I would assume is this. Sometimes sickness is a result of sin. We know that from Corinthians. We know that from other passages in the Scripture. Not always. Sometimes it's for God's glory, like in the deal of Job. But he says, stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. I assume, that this man had done something and that maybe his 38 years of being an invalid was tied to something that he had done. And when he does get healed, naturally the first place he's going to go is to make things right with God at the temple. or to thank God for God healing him at the temple. So he makes his way there, and Jesus says, okay, listen, you know what? I'm glad you're here, but you need to stop doing this. And the man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. I mean, how dare you heal somebody who's been sick for 38 years on the Sabbath? And so, notice what happens. In his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working. And when he looks at him, he says, guys, newsflash, God doesn't take off on the Sabbath. Yes, it's a day of rest and reflection, but God's still at work. And so am I. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. This is what pushed her. This is one of the things that pushes them over the edge. Fascinating story. There's all kinds of implications for it. All kinds of things, I think, for us to learn. First of all, there's this idea of desire. He looks at this guy and he says, what do you really want? Do you really want to be well? Now, to us, that seems like a silly question. But I want you to think about this for a second. If he gets well, his life is going to change. In other words, for 38 years, he's had this little routine. For 38 years, he's had this social circle of all these invalid, sick people. For 38 years, that's been his routine over and over and over and over and over again. If he gets well, who's he going to hang with now? His social circle changes. And by the way, if he gets well, he's now going to have to go get a job. Because he's just been able to sit there and collect money. In other words, one of the things that Jesus is asking is, do you understand that if you're made well, your world's going to change? Is that really what you want? And by the way, he's had this for 38 years. So if he even had it as a child, he's 38. He's going to live to what, 50, 60? He's only got like another 12 plus years. Let me ask you something, those of you who are older. Here's a new phone. Do you want to learn it? Let's see. 15 years, I'll be gone. Nah, not worth it. I mean, you know, again, his world is going to turn upside down. Is that really what you want? Yeah, you say that you're sitting here saying you want to get well, but do you really, really want to get well? Because that's going to come at a cost to you. So Jesus looks at him and says, what do you desire here? Do you really, really want this? Because your world is going to radically change from everything you've known for the last 38 years. How many times do we see that in our life? Well, you don't understand, Pastor. If I become a Christian, like all the stuff that I want to do, I'm not going to be able to do anymore. Yeah? It'll slowly change. Well, like my friends that I hang with, they're not going to want to hang around with me anymore. Well, maybe. They may also want what you have, and you guys grow together. I don't know. But you got to ask yourself, is that really what you want? And be honest with yourself. So he looks at this guy. He says, you really want to get well? Are you ready for this? Second idea that I see here is you can't keep doing it the way that you want to do it. You see, what's fascinating to me is Jesus is standing in front of this guy. He asks him, do you want to get well? And you know what the guy's focused on? The pool. Well, yeah, I could get well if, here's the process. And this is the way it's all supposed to work out. And if you could get somebody to help me get into water faster, then yeah, I can get healed. You want to know what I've found in my Christian journey? So many times we get in our head that God's got to work a certain way. And we get so focused on that process. We even pray that way. God, this is what I want you to do, and this is what you're going to, I'm going to name this, and I'm going to claim this, and then you're going to have to do this, and this, and this, and this. When we focus on this big, long process, and we miss Jesus. If you're a Christian, your life is His. He can do with it whatever He wants, in whatever way He wants to do it, because He's God. I go back to my journey. Let me tell you something. It was not in my plan to be here. I should be in a big city where there's a lot of concrete and asphalt and choices. I want to be able to drive somewhere and just pull in and go, what food does my heart desire? Because within 5 minutes, there are all of these places that I can enjoy. I go 5 minutes, I'm in a cornfield. This wasn't my plan. This was what God had for me. And you know what? I couldn't be happier. I just simply said, okay, God, if that's what you want, that's what I'll do. You want to go preach in this little... The first time I came to Holly Springs, people will tell you, I drove past it. I didn't even know it was a town. We got halfway to Smithland. And I looked at my wife and I said, do you think that little place that we passed back there was Holly Springs? She goes, I don't know. But we've driven way too far. We turned around, came back. Back then, there was a sign that said Holly Springs, coming from Smithland. There wasn't coming from Sioux City. And we walked up. So, I'm going to tell you about our first Sunday. So, there were a couple of guys smoking on the front step of the church, panicking because the pastor who was going to do the service wasn't there yet. Trying to figure out if one of them was going to have to do it. So once I walked through the cloud of smoke, I came in to do the service, and they loved us like nobody's business, and we loved them, and God has done some incredible things, and God continued. We're so glad you're here this morning to be part of this story. I could not be happier. But it wasn't the way I had it all planned out. You've got to be willing to say, God, look, my life is yours. You do with it what you want. And take your hands off and let Him do it. This guy had to, instead of sitting there and focusing on the pool and the angel and who's getting in there first and all the things, he just needed to be obedient to Jesus, and that's what he does. I don't even know like I say, there are situations in the New Testament where faith is involved in healing. In this situation, there isn't. In this situation, he doesn't even know it's Jesus. All he knows is somebody told him, stand up, take up your mat, and start walking. And he goes, okay. And after 38 years of being an invalid, he's walking. And not only is he walking, he has enough strength to carry his mat. And it's a testimony. And the whole reason I think Jesus does this is so it brings attention to it. Look, you can't do it your way. You've got to be willing to do what God wants you to do. Third principle is this. It is about obedience. This is the thing that I think gets me so often is we talk about things that we want in our lives, but we're really not willing to be obedient like we need to be. And that's why I say, this is a question about will. This is a question about desire. What do you really, really, really want? And be honest with yourself. What do you really want to be healed? Well, the whole process is a problem. And Get up and go walk. Take your mat with you. You go, it's simple. Doesn't mean it was easy. But yeah, the answer was simple. I see this all the time. Oh, Pastor, my wife and I are struggling, and, or my husband and I are struggling, and we're talking about divorce, and we're not sure. And I will do anything, Pastor. Okay. Here's what the Bible says you need to do as a spouse. I check up a couple of weeks later. So how's it going? Well, I know what you told us, but, we saw an attorney, and the attorney advised that if I do that, they could use it against me in court, so I don't need to go down that road. Okay, so you really, really don't want it fixed at any cost. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself. Oh, I want to lose weight. Okay, go to your doctor. He can tell you how to do it. Well, you got to exercise. Well, I got this bum leg, and so there's not a lot that I can do. Okay, then you can go and you can do this. Well, you don't want it bad enough. Be honest with yourself. Well, we want to raise godly kids. Awesome. Here's what you do. There's no magic guarantee, but this will weigh odds in your favor. Every night you get out a Bible story book and you read them a Bible story. Well, you don't understand. I'm pretty tired when I get home. And, it's really hard for us to do. And, I just don't know the Bible that much. Well, here's a clue. Here's an easy way to learn the Bible, okay? Start coming to church. Bring your kids to Sunday school. Put them in there with Jimmy. You sit in the back and you learn the Bible stories. Well, you don't understand. Like, Sundays are so hard for us as a family to get. How bad do you want it? Because I got news for you. If your kid's on a sports team and they schedule practices early in the morning before school, you'll get them there. Be honest with yourself. Be honest about what do you really, really desire, and are you willing to pay the cost? Is that really honest? That's what Jesus looked at. You really want to get well? Even though your world's going to turn upside down, even though it's going to be difficult, even though you're going to have to go get a job, even though you really want this? The man's like, yep, I'll get up, start walking. I think we have to be honest with ourselves. And it's a question of desire. And this is what I see so often. I hear it all the time. I want a great marriage. Great. Here's a great start. Go to a marriage conference. Oh, you don't know. It's so expensive. If your kid's on a traveling team, you'll drop twice that amount to be at one of their games on a weekend. It's about desire. How bad do you want it? If you know our story, I wanted a great marriage so bad, I quit my job in order to have a great marriage. You don't think that was a cost involved with that? But I was that serious about it. Because I realized my marriage was being ruined because I was too focused on my job. Now, it's about desire. How bad do you want it? And here's what I've learned. Well, my wife has taught me this. If I want it, I go get it. I can convince myself to buy a tool that I will never use in 5 years because I need it. We can do that. And if you want it bad enough, but you have to be honest with yourself. The last issue is this, and this is the thing I love about this story. Jesus does not assume anything about this person. He doesn't walk up to him and force himself on him. There's all kinds of principles here. One of the things is, the text even says there are a whole bunch of people around here who are sick and need him, and he picks out one person. Why? Because that person was important to him, and he comes to that person and offers him healing, and he offers him the opportunity to be whole again, but he has to choose it. God shows up in order to deal with this person, but this person still has to choose. And God does the same thing with us. God's not going to force himself on you. He will come to you. He will offer you help. He's not going to make you take it. He's not going to force himself into your life. He's going to be there. You are the one who's going to have to choose him. This guy had to choose. He could have sat there and said, when Jesus looked at him and said, stand up, he could have gone, oh, you don't understand. I've been able to do that for 38 years. You know, don't you understand what's wrong with me? I can't do that. I don't have the ability to do that. I haven't done that in a long time. My legs, I don't even know if my legs could handle it. He could have sat there with all of those excuses. And when he does, he stands up. But he had to make the choice. God will do the same thing with you. God will come to you. He will be there for you. He will provide you what you need. He's going to do it his way, not yours. And you have to trust him. God chose this guy for whatever reason. I think it was because he had had this thing for so long. And everybody in the community knew it. And he's the guy with the mat who can walk and pay even more attention to him so that God could be honored and glorified. And even down to the day that he does it, Sabbath, God has all of these things lined up for his honor and his glory in order to be able to do it. But he came to him. He had to choose. And listen, you have to choose God. God's not going to force himself in your life. God may do a lot of things in your life to bring you to an awareness of him. But he's not going to force himself on you. You have to choose him. And I think it's one of the great lessons that you see in this story. Is God comes to this guy and he says, look, do you really want this? Because if you do, stand up, take your mat, and start walking. And the first place this guy goes is the temple. And God meets him at the temple and says, now, let's talk about your spiritual life. Change up some things. And he walks away then, goes to the elders and says, hey, that guy, his name's Jesus. And you can go talk to him about it all. I'm just being obedient. I'm doing what the guy told me to do. So I end with this morning. Jesus meets the sick man and wants to know what his real desire is. It's a challenge for us to look at our heart as well. Do we really want to change our circumstances and situation? Because if we really desire to follow God, then obedience is going to be a big part of that. Let's pray. Lord, help us, guide us. Help us be honest with ourselves. There's a lot of things in life that we say we want. But the reality of it is, Lord, we really don't want to be obedient to be able to do what we need to do. So, Lord, help us to deal with our wills, to deal with honestly with our hearts before you. That we have the kind of marriages, that we'd have the kind of families, that we'd have the kind of church and community, Lord, that you desire for us to be. So use this in our life for us to be honest with ourselves this week and asking, what do we really desire? And when it is all said and done, Lord, will we draw us closer to you and closer to your word. These things